I am 82 years old, Krold, and today I want to tell you something, Kroll, nobody wants to admit. I want to tell you a truth that goes against absolutely everything you have been taught about growing old in this world. Society tells you that a quiet house is a sad house. They tell you that an old man sitting alone in a chair is a tragedy, waiting for an audience. They tell you that isolation is a terrible disease, and they tell you that you need to cure it with constant motion and constant noise. I am here to tell you that they are completely wrong. I am sitting in my living room right now. The sun is just starting to come up over the pine trees. In my backyard, I am holding a cup of black coffee. It is the exact same coffee I have made for myself every single morning for the last 40 years. The house is completely silent. I can hear the floorboards settle. I can hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. I can hear my own breathing. To the outside world, this looks like bitter isolation. To me, it is the ultimate prize I won. After a lifetime of exhausting noise, it took me 8 decades of hard labor and heavy grief to build this beautiful silence. I am not going to let anyone take it from me. You look at me, and you see an old man fading away, but I am not fading. I am finally coming into sharp focus. I was a high school history teacher for 4 long decades. For 40 years, my life was entirely ruled by the clock. My life was ruled by the morning bell, the lunch bell, the dismissal bell. I stood in front of thousands of loud teenagers. I projected my weary voice over the endless chaos of youth. I broke up fights in the crowded hallways. I sat through endless faculty meetings, in stuffy rooms with harsh fluorescent lights, buzzing right over my head. I gave my physical and mental energy to the public every single day. I poured my life force into crowded classrooms and grading papers and difficult parent-teacher conferences. I was a loyal servant to the noise. And when the school day finally ended, I came home to a very full house. I was married to Margaret for 50 years. Margaret was a truly wonderful woman, but she was a highly social creature. She thrived on constant human interaction. Our house was always full of guests. We hosted dinner parties, we had neighborhood barbecues, we had large family gatherings that stretched long into the cold night. I loved her deeply, so I played my part. I smiled at the guests. I poured the red wine. I listened to people tell boring stories I had already heard a dozen times before. I learned to carve out tiny slivers of peace in the bathroom, or out in the cold garage, while I pretended to look for a broken tool. I was always surrounded by people, and I was always completely exhausted. I thought that was just what a good man did. You sacrifice your own peace to keep the house warm and entertaining for everyone else. Margaret passed away 7 years ago. The first year was a terrible blur of heavy grief. It is a crushing thing to lose the person who holds your entire history in their hands. When she left, the loud noise left with her. The big house became a dark cavern. For a long time, the absolute silence was painful. It only reminded me of exactly what was missing. But as the sharp grief began to settle into something dull and manageable, the silence of the house began to reveal itself in a totally different way. It was not an empty silence anymore. It was a rich, heavy, beautiful silence. I started to breathe deeply for the first time in my adult life. I started reading thick history books for hours without someone tapping me on the shoulder to ask what I wanted for lunch. I started waking up early just to watch the dust dance in the morning light without having to explain why. I was awake. I started walking through my own home without having to navigate around the complex emotional needs of another human being. I was finally healing. I was discovering a quiet version of myself that had been buried under decades of endless compromise. But society does not let an old man heal in peace. The world hates a solitary creature. My adult children started to worry about me. My daughter would call and interrogate me about what I did all day. When I told her I sat in the garden and watched the birds for 3 hours, she thought I was severely depressed. She thought I was giving up on life. The neighbors would see me walking slowly to get the mail, bale, and they would give me that terrible look of bearable, deep pity. They started talking about me over their fences. They whispered that poor William is wasting away in that big empty house. They decided I needed a romantic companion. They decided I needed a reason to live, as if my own peaceful existence was not reason enough. They pressured me constantly. You hear something enough times, and you actually start to believe it. You start to think that your profound peace is actually a dangerous sickness. You start to doubt your own comfort. You think you are failing at the end of your life. So I finally gave in. I let them introduce me to a woman named Beatrice. Beatrice was a retired real estate agent. She was 74 years old. She was very loud, she was very active, and she was absolutely terrified of being left alone with her own thoughts. We went to a busy local diner for our first meeting. She talked for 2 straight hours without taking a breath. She told me all about her ungrateful grandchildren, her endless physical ailments, her strong opinions on the local government. I just nodded politely and drank my hot tea. People saw us together in town, and they were absolutely thrilled. The neighbors smiled and waved at us. My daughter was deeply relieved. William was finally rejoining the active world. I allowed Beatrice to become a part of my daily routine. I honestly thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was. Being a healthy older man, I thought I was extending my life by being socially active. But the true cost of that forced companionship was my absolute sanity. It started with the telephone. I used to keep my phone hidden in a drawer in the kitchen. I only checked it twice a day. Beatrice believed a phone was a tight leash. She would call me at 8 in the morning to tell me she was going to the grocery store. She would call me at noon to tell me exactly what she bought at the grocery store. If I did not answer the phone immediately, she would leave very anxious messages. I found myself carrying the phone in my pocket all day long. I felt a constant, low-level dread waiting for the plastic box to vibrate against my leg. I was no longer the master of my own morning. My quiet attention belonged entirely to her anxiety. Then, she started coming over to my house. My house was my sacred sanctuary. Every single object had its specific place. The lighting was always soft. The air was always still. The smell was just old wood and fresh coffee. Beatrice brought absolute chaos into my temple. She wore a heavy perfume that smelled like strong flowers and harsh chemicals. It lingered in my living room for days after she finally went home. She would turn on the television the very moment she walked in the front door. She said she desperately needed background noise to feel comfortable. I had not turned on that television in 3 long years. Suddenly, my quiet afternoons were filled with the loud voices of angry news anchors yelling about terrible tragedies I could not control. She filled my peaceful sanctuary with the anxious, frantic vibration of the outside world. She wanted to change things in my home. She brought over a bright red throw blanket and draped it over my worn leather armchair. She said, the dark room needed a pop of happy color. I hated that red blanket. It was scratchy and it was loud. It felt like a violent invasion of my visual peace. But I left it there because I was trying to be an agreeable partner. I was trying very hard not to be. The grumpy old man everyone feared I was becoming. Then came the endless physical activities. She wanted to go to the local farmers market on Saturday mornings. I ask you to imagine going to a crowded public market when you are 82 years old. It is a pure physical nightmare. There are crowds of people pushing aggressively past you. There are baby strollers hitting your weak ankles. You have to stand in a long line for 20 minutes just to buy an overpriced jar of local honey. My bad knees would ache terribly. My lower back would throb with sharp pain. I would come home completely drained, stripped of all my vital energy for the rest of the weekend. And the money was another serious issue. I am on a strict fixed income. I live simply because I want to be financially secure in my final years. I do not want to be a heavy burden to my children when my body finally fails. Beatrice liked to eat out. She was at fancy restaurants constantly. She liked to buy expensive tickets to local theater productions. I was spending my hard-earned savings to sit in uncomfortable chairs and watch amateur actors forget their lines. I was paying good money to be physically and mentally exhausted. I was performing the exhausting role of a happy boyfriend. But my internal battery was flashing red every single day. I found myself sitting in my car in the driveway for 10 full minutes before going inside my own house, just trying to gather the necessary strength to face her constant talking. I felt like a silent hostage in the life I had worked so hard to build. I remembered my old friend Thomas. Thomas lost his wife and remarried quickly just to avoid the quiet house. Thomas spent the last 5 years of his life arguing over thermostat settings and driving his new wife to endless shopping malls. Thomas looked miserable every time. I saw him at the hardware store. He traded his absolute freedom for the illusion of companionship, and it killed his spirit long before his heart stopped beating. I realized I was walking down the exact same dark path. The breaking point did not happen during a massive, dramatic argument. It happened on a regular rainy Thursday morning. Beatrice had spent the night. I woke up at my usual 5 in the morning, looking forward to the dark, quiet house. That early morning silence is profoundly sacred to me. I walked into the kitchen and found the harsh overhead fluorescent lights glaring in my tired eyes. Beatrice was already awake. She was banging heavy metal pots and pans, cooking loud eggs. The kitchen radio was playing loud pop music. She looked at me and started talking immediately before I even had a chance to pour my morning coffee. She was complaining bitterly about a dull pain in her shoulder. She was complaining about a selfish friend who did not call her back. She was complaining about the rain outside. I stood there in my old robe. I did not say a single word. I just watched her move around my kitchen, leaving a messy trail of dirty dishes, filling the sacred morning air with meaningless noise. I looked at the ugly red blanket sitting in my living room. I listened to the radio blaring. I felt my chest tighten with a profound sense of suffocation. I realized in that exact moment that I was trading the few precious years I had left to serve as an emotional dumping ground for someone who did not even know who I actually was. She did not want William the person. She wanted a warm, breathing body to sit next to her so she would not have to face her own dark thoughts. She wanted a human shock absorber for her own neuroses. I was completely abandoning myself just to keep her comfortable. I was spending my final years managing the emotional state of a stranger. I walked slowly over to the radio and turned it off. The sudden silence in the room was shocking and beautiful. Beatrice stopped talking mid-sentence. She looked at me, holding a wooden spoon in her hand. I looked right back at her. With absolute clarity, I told her to pack her things and go home. I told her I did not want her to come back to my house ever again. She was furious. Her face turned dark red. She told me I was making a terrible mistake. She told me I was going to die a lonely, bitter man. She said nobody else would ever want to be with me at my age. I looked at her and told her that was the absolute best news I had heard in months. I walked her to the front door. I watched her drive away in the cold rain. I went back inside and locked the heavy metal deadbolt. I took the red blanket off my chair and carried it straight out to the trash can in the garage. I washed the dirty dishes she left in the sink. I turned off the harsh overhead lights. I sat down in my old leather chair. I listened to the rain hitting the window glass. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. It was so heavy I almost floated away. The deep silence washed over me like a warm, healing bath. I was alone, and I was entirely whole. I was the architect of my own peace again. I am speaking to you now. The ones who are 50 or 60, the ones who are terrified of aging alone. You are letting modern society tell you a massive, dangerous lie. They tell you that a full, busy calendar is the only measure of a successful life. They tell you that if you are not constantly surrounded by people, you have fundamentally failed at living. They are projecting their own deep fear of silence directly onto you. People are terrified of being alone because they do not like who they are when the room is finally quiet. They desperately need other people to distract them from their own restless minds. But when you reach my age, if you have done the hard work of living, you do not need cheap distractions anymore. Your mind is a vast, rich library. Your memories are enough. There is a massive, critical difference between being lonely and being solitary. Loneliness is a sharp physical ache. It is a feeling of desperate lack. Solitude is a heavy fortress. Solitude is profound power. When I was with Beatrice, I was profoundly lonely. I was sitting right next to her on the sofa, but I was completely invisible. I was hiding my true self just to keep the peace. Now I am by myself in this big house, But I am never lonely. I am keeping company with myself, and I find that I am an excellent companion. I read the thick history books I actually want to read. I eat exactly what I want to eat. If I want to spend 5 continuous hours restoring an old wooden clock without speaking a single word to another human being, I do it. I do not have to explain my odd choices to anyone. I am not accountable to anyone else and their fragile emotional state. I am the absolute master of my own time. Energy is the absolute most valuable currency you have in the final chapters of your life. When you are 30 years old, you think your energy is an endless deep well. You can work 10 grueling hours, go to a crowded, noisy bar, sleep for 4 short hours, and do it all again the very next day. When you are 82, your energy is a highly limited daily allowance. Every single time you say yes to an obligation you do not actually want to do, you are spending your actual life force. You are giving away the precious hours you have left to someone who does not even value them. You are draining your own blood to water their garden. You need to stop trying to please everyone around you. You need to stop saying yes when your aching bones are begging you to say no. You think you are being a good friend, a good parent, a good partner, but you are really just abandoning yourself. You are draining your own internal battery to keep someone else warm. Your adult children do not need you to be a social butterfly. They just need you to be at peace with yourself. Your neighbors do not actually care about your emotional well-being. They just want something interesting to gossip about over their wooden fences. Stop living your life for the audience in the cheap seats. The long play is almost over. It is time to step off the bright stage. Take off your heavy, uncomfortable costume and go home. Your home is not a sad waiting room for death. Death. It is the sacred sanctuary you spent decades building with your own sweat and tears. You worked the long shifts. You paid the heavy mortgage. You fixed the broken roof. You paid for the quiet. You earned the absolute. Right to lock the front door and keep the noisy world outside. You do not owe anyone your remaining time. You do not owe anyone a performance of false happiness. If you want to sit in a worn chair and watch the dust float in the sunlight for 3 hours, you are succeeding at life. You are protecting your peace. Staying home is not laziness. It is vital energy protection. If you are lucky enough to find someone who truly understands your silence, someone who actually adds to your deep peace instead of draining it away, then keep them close. That is a rare, beautiful miracle. But do not tear your own life apart, trying to fit a square. Peg into a round hole just because society tells you to be afraid of the dark. Do not invite chaotic energy into your living room just to avoid sitting by yourself. The quiet is absolutely not your enemy. The quiet is where you finally meet yourself after a long lifetime of serving others. I am 82 years old. My physical body is slow, my knees ache terribly when it rains, and my circle of friends is very small. I do not have a full, busy calendar. I do not have a loud social life to brag about to strangers. I have my quiet house, my hot black coffee, my old books, and my profound, beautiful peace. I am not a sad tragedy for you to pity. I am a man who finally won his freedom. Peace is expensive. Stop giving it away for free.